So on our list of television video attribution methods, let's now talk about one of the most modern methods for television attribution in the micro section, which is smart TV or ACR data, also known as automatic content recognition. And that data is made accessible or available through any number of brands such as iSpot, TVsquared, Samba. The list of brands will change because the industry is moving fast. But the way that it works is roughly all the same. So let's talk about what ACR is, how it's used for television attribution, and then where do things go wrong. So you buy a television. It could be an LG, it could be a Vizio, any number of brands. You plug it in. That's supposed to be a plug, smiley. All right, so you plug it in. And as part of the setup process, as anyone who's bought a TV recently knows, you're going to be asked a lot of questions to help set it up. It's going to probably ask you for your address. It's going to ask for a number of things. And buried in that setup is going to be a question that says, do you want to share data? And usually they bury this in 4 or 5 steps. So by the time you get to this screen, you're already checking yes to everything. Yes, 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 go. Because I just want to watch the TV. I plug it in, I want to watch it. So get me through these things. But this is very important here because you've agreed to share your data. So what happens when you make that agreement is as follows. The physical device, the television itself, is detecting what's showing on its pixels or what's going through the speaker. There's any number of ways that the technology could work. But in one way or another, it's detecting a fingerprint of what is showing. And it then sends that data back to some centralized repository, either the manufacturer or a representative of that manufacturer, along with an identifier for that device. Oftentimes, it's just the IP address. So we now are collecting, or the brand is collecting data on what's getting watched. Doesn't exactly know what the content is. It just has a fingerprint for it and an identifier for either that household or at a minimum the device itself, the hardware that it's actually showing on. Here's where things get interesting. Let's say that brand XYZ runs a television spot. These physical devices can detect that, hey, there's something that's showing on my screen. I don't know what it is. It doesn't know that it's for brand XYZ, or at least not yet. That's going to come at some point. The technology is not there just yet. But it detects that something is showing on my screen and I have a fingerprint for it, just like a person leaving a fingerprint on something that they touched. We don't know who that person is, but we see that there's a fingerprint there. That's exactly what these TVs are doing. So then let's say a day later, you have a person that is on their mobile device. And let's say that mobile device is using that same IP address. Maybe they're in the same household. And let's say that on this mobile device, someone enters in XYZ, or they go onto Google or a search engine and they do a search for brand XYZ. That's where things get exciting, because now what this allows you to do, you have to do some controlling. So there's some additional steps I'm leaving out here, but it creates the potential for a direct down the funnel attribution. And what I mean by that is that you had an exposure event here, and then we can detect a consequence of that exposure event, a conversion or a site visit that we've linked together in some way. In this case, it was the IP address. And then we have to do some controlling, though, to say, all right, well, would this person have come even if that ad didn't show? That's something we're not showing here. But you have a direct down the funnel attribution approach. That is very unique from just about everything else, all the other attribution methods that we have. And that makes it one of the most accurate methods. In fact, if you're doing television in the US, you almost have to use it because it's just the most accurate way of measuring how much impact your dollars spent are having that you're putting through television and video. Now, let's talk a little bit about where things go wrong and the limitations of this method. So as good as it is, there's quite a few issues. So number one is you need what's called an ad catalog. So remember I was telling you that the television doesn't exactly know what it's showing. It just has a fingerprint. So it's just like you detected a fingerprint on on a cup that's at someone's house. You don't know who the person is, similar to how you don't know what was actually showing on the screen, but you know that there was something unique showing because it has a different fingerprint. You need someone to then do the work to say, well, what are all the possible, what's all the possible ads that could have shown on that TV, and then let's find the best match for the fingerprint between what that ad that I know of and then what was actually shown. So just like if you're, again, going back to using a person's fingerprint, you need to have a catalog of, hey, this fingerprint goes with this person. Same thing with ad catalogs. So you need someone to do that. The smart TV data itself is really messy. It doesn't have any information about what ads are actually showing, content is shown. You need someone to do that join. And so that's where you have companies like an iSpot or TVsquared come in that build up that ad catalog. Again, it's kind of that Rolodex of this ad maps to this fingerprint, and hey, we saw this fingerprint show on that device, so we could link it all together. And building that ad catalog takes a lot of work, and so that's one of the challenges with this data. Another problem is it's US only right now. There may be some exceptions to this, but at least at scale, it's US only. And one of the big reasons for that is privacy, right? So just think about what we're doing here. We're detecting, we don't exactly know what the person saw, but we're detecting unique fingerprints that can then get joined in such a way that we could detect what was being seen. That feels pretty invasive. And so that's for that reason in Europe, you're not going to see a technology like this. In the US, it's pervasive. So this technology is available and in use on a large number of very big manufacturers. But that's something to be aware of. If you're doing an international campaign, particularly in Europe, this is not going to work. So that's another problem. Number 3, we have to think about the bias in who's using these devices, these TVs. So it has to be a smart TV. Already that's giving you a clue that, hey, does the general population, do all types of people buy smart TVs at the same rate? And the answer to that is no. So usually you need to do some type of adjustment. So usually it's higher income folks that tend to be buying certain types of smart TVs, high-end televisions. And so you need to kind of adjust for that. And depending on what it is that, like what your brand is, that may be very consequential. Again, brands like iSpot, Samba, and others will usually do some type of bias correction, but you have to be aware of what's going on there. It's very important. Number 4. So we did this was a simple link here, joining on IP between the smart device that accessed the site, that responded, and the exposure on the television. But what happens if this device was outside of that person's home? So say if they were just walking around outside in a park. So this is a tree, and the person's walking around in the park, and they're on their 5G. So it's a different IP address. So in order to still make that connection, you need what's called a device map or device graph. And what that does is it tells you, hey, this device, even though it's it's not under the same household at this given point in time, we associate with this household that has that same television. And there's different ways of doing this. So it could be time related, where, hey, we saw that smart device on that IP recently or frequently enough, so we detect that, we make an assumption that it's part of that household. And then when we see that same device outside, we could say, all right, we still are going to link it to that household. So different ways of doing it. But that could create error. That could create leakage where, we may be missing devices that are actually part of that household that aren't getting captured. Similarly, we could also have cases where someone's maybe a visitor came to the house and left. They're not actually part of that household, and so we do some type of misattribution where we say someone responded to an ad when in fact they didn't actually see that ad. Certainly happens. So that's where things could break with this. So the other thing that could go wrong is misdetections over here. And so the name I have, I call it by is phantom spots. So you might see detections of ads that you've long since stopped running, but yet you're still detecting them. So it doesn't make any sense. You're like, how is that possible? Sometimes there's legitimate reasons, like it could be a person DVR'd, and so then they're just playing the recording at a later time. And again, this device or the hardware is just detecting what's showing on the screen. So it's possible that there's legitimate reasons, but sometimes you just can't explain it, and it's just because of some error that's happening in the join itself. There's a 6th issue. You need some type of control in order to get closer to causality. Causality. All right. What do I mean by that? So let's say you're a major brand. You're ubiquitous across the U.S. So maybe you're a TripAdvisor, or you're an Uber, or you're an Amazon. Chances are the majority of the U.S. population is already using your site. And so just because you show an ad for brand XYZ and then get a detection later on, doesn't mean that this ad caused that person to visit the site. This person may have visited your site even if that ad was not shown. And for large organizations, this is actually the norm. If the majority of the US population is already using your product, oftentimes daily in some cases, you have to do some type of controlling to be able to detect that, hey, if this ad did not show, I am certain that this person wouldn't have come. And so there's a lot of methods for doing this. Some of it is related to propensity scoring. Some of it is related to various causal inference techniques. iSpot has a good one that I've used and helped our data science teams actually worked together to develop it. So different ways of doing it, but that has to get done. Particularly if you're a large organization, otherwise you're going to have a lot of misattribution here. So I hope this has been helpful in covering how smart television attribution works. If you're in the US and your company is comfortable with the privacy issues, then this is almost a no-brainer. It's the most accurate from a mathematical perspective because it gives you direct down the funnel attribution. Things could still go wrong, but you have to compare it to the alternatives. And I'd rather have this set of problems than some of the alternative problems that we're going to see in other attribution methods. I hope this has been helpful.